Hello, everyone. My name is Urmilla Sowell, the Advocacy and Technical Director for the National Glass Association. Thank you for joining us today for our informational webinar on the Inflation Reduction Act. NGA's disclaimer is as follows. The purpose of this presentation is to provide general guidance to our member community. The information expressed herein represent the views only of the technical staff of NGA and are based upon information, technical data, codes, standards, and/or regulations reasonable available at the time of publication. They have not been reviewed or approved by the NGA or NGA Board of Directors or its officers. The service is provided as a guide as opposed to instruction, legal advice, and/or technical advice. NGA strongly urges that any technical and/or legal questions be directed to a designated representative of a model code organization, a local building code jurisdiction, a licensed design professional, and/or a licensed attorney. The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 was passed by the 117th United States Congress and signed into law by President Joe Biden on August 16, 2022. This bill is a result of negotiations on the proposed Build Back Better Act of 2021, which U.S. House of Representatives passed and sent to the Senate last November. Today, we're going to discuss the new Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 and some possible impacts on the glass and glazing industry. Dr. Tom Culp is the owner of Birch Consulting. He has spent the last 21 years in the glass and window industry in the areas of energy efficient glazing and window performance, low E glass coatings, and building code development. Tom is a co-chair of the ASHRAE 90.1 Standards Committee and is a chair of the new International Energy Code Committee Commercial Envelope Subcommittee. He's an active participant in the International Code Council Code Development hearing process and serves as the Energy and Green Construction Code Consultant for the Aluminum Extruders Council, the National Glass Association, and the Glazing Industry Code Committee. Tom, tell us about this act. What are we going to discuss today?
All right, thanks, Urmilla. Yeah, there's a lot in that. And you've probably seen there's a lot of general overviews out there in the press, kind of talking at a very high level what it's doing. I just want you to know, we actually went through and read all the text of the law, and we will be hitting some of the highlights, not just from a general standpoint, but really, how does it impact us specifically? What are some of the areas of interest that affect the fenestration and glazing industry? I'd also like to give, I guess, my own caveats. I am not a tax attorney. This is not tax advice. This is just my own layman's reading of the text, looking into the actual text of the law and the details. But it's really just my reading of it. And as we'll talk about, there's some actions that need to happen by the Secretary of Energy, the Labor Secretary, guidance issued by IRS before this law can actually really be implemented in real life. So, but we wanted to give a flavor of what's coming. Also today, I guess we're gonna, there's a lot in here. This is, there's stuff in there about corporate tax reform and prescription drug pricing reform. We won't be talking about that. We're really going to focus on energy, climate, and manufacturing areas of interest to us. So along those lines, this is not going to read through all this. This is just, even setting aside the corporate tax and prescription drug pricing reform, it's still a big bill. It does a lot. There's just take a glance at some of the items on here. It's addressing issues on all fuel types, a kind of all of the above type approach you may have read about: solar, offshore wind and gas, biogas, biofuels, clean hydrogen, nuclear, a lot in terms of infrastructure, electrical infrastructure. Some of you heard me speak about electrification before and kind of some broader goals, and that's part of this as well, where there are incentives for domestic manufacturing of EV vehicles, batteries, critical elements, clean vehicle credits, domestic EV charging stations, things like that. So it's really a big bill. So we're not going to focus on all that. Really, it's going to pick out some of the key areas that are particular interest to our industry. So to start off, as you know, most of you know me from kind of building energy codes, and there is a lot happening in that area in this bill. So on the building energy code front, there's $1 billion appropriated to DOE that then will go out to state and local government grants to accelerate the adoption and use of building energy codes. So it's split up into $330 million that will assist states and local governments to adopt the latest energy code, which is defined as the 2021 IECC for residential and ASHRAE 90.1 2019 for commercial. And then after that, there's another $670 million, so even more, that it's going out to these governmental groups to assist in adopting a zero energy code. And it says it can be based upon, there's a voluntary zero energy appendix in the 2021 IECC or an equivalent stretch code. So it's kind of a little more open-ended, but these will be issued as grants going out to the states to do that. And they include not only just adopting the code and just, you know, checking a box, it's a lot of money, and it includes for training and enforcement to achieve full compliance, which, you know, that's a little vague on what that means, but the idea is, like, you know, not just have it on the books, but actually have training and enforcement in place to make these codes effective. And this will be over the time period from now through 2029, so kind of a 7-year period.
So Tom, what does this mean for the glass and glazing industry?
So yeah, so many of you see me talk on building codes and, you know, this few factors changing, or they're adding this or that. This is a way to accelerate that actually getting into the code, because another part of my talks is always that your local code may vary. Check out what's happening in your state, because it'll be different in somewhere like Maryland versus Oklahoma. And so this will accelerate the adoption, trying to get everyone more on an even keel. This happened once before in 2009. The stimulus funding package that went out gave states money if they adopted the 2009 IECC at that time, and it worked. There was a big increase in adoption across almost all states, not all, but most, and it really kind of allowed the states to ratchet up to the latest level. I expect that same thing will happen here. And what that means is you'll see use of those new U factors that I'm always talking about in my updates. So that will push kind of more energy efficient products. The next step, pushing things like forced surface low E, gas fill, warm edge spacers, better frames, and then it won't necessarily push triple glazing, except in the extreme north, but it will kind of help push in that direction. And then the zero energy code, that being adopted, will do all that, and then on top of it, add renewable energy. So on-site PV, BIPV, solar panels basically will be the easiest way to get there. So that'll be a strong push of this as well. Okay. And then going beyond the just that building code piece, which is a lot of money, a big piece. Well, first we'll go through some of the residential provisions, and then we'll hit into the commercial provisions, and then some manufacturing issues as well. But this is the 25C residential credit. It's been renamed the Energy Efficient Home Improvement Credit section. So many of you may be familiar from this from previous years. It's been in place for quite a long time, actually, and then it either gets extended or not, and it's kind of been wavering back and forth. Well, now it's been extended through 2032. One important change, the previous lifetime limit was now changed to an annual limit. So a homeowner can take credit up to $1,200 annual for all 25C credits. So that includes not just windows and things like that of interest to us, but also, HVAC and insulation and so forth, but it's on an annual basis. So that's important because it allows people who, like myself, who have taken that credit in prior years, were never previously not allowed to take it again in future years if I do insulation one year and mechanical equipment or windows the next year. that changes that, where you're allowed to take these credits each year. For us, windows and doors and skylights, it's 30% up to $600 for windows and skylights, up to $250 for one door, or $500 for multiple doors. So that's kind of the numbers. So that is an increase over the current limit, especially because it's available annually now.
That's good for the homeowners. So what are the qualification requirements for, windows and doors and skylights?
So to qualify, and this may surprise some people. So I think a lot of people were expecting it to be tied to Energy Star or a certain code level. But what the requirement is that it must be, windows must be certified to the Energy Star most efficient program, which many of you are familiar with, but maybe not all. And it's kind of the next level beyond Energy Star. So this is a U factor less than or equal to 0.20 in all zones. That's basically triple glazing. Solar heat gain varies by zone, less than 2.5 in the south, less than 4.0 in the north central, and then actually has a minimum solar heat gain in the north. So that's coming out of the Energy Star most efficient program. Doors just have to meet the regular Energy Star requirements, so not the most efficient program. And then skylights are a little interesting because it needs to be certified to the Energy Star most efficient program, but skylights are not included in the most efficient program. So therefore, we don't know if this was a flaw or an oversight, but there is no credit for skylights currently. Now it could be, it does not require a congressional fix. It still refers to the Energy Star most efficient program. So, and I've spoken with Doug Anderson, and they are aware of this, that EPA may choose to add skylights to the most efficient program in the future, although the numbers of skylights that are there right now is small, so that'll be a decision EPA will have to make.
Okay.
There's some other stuff on residential, kind of a laundry list of maybe not Windows specific, but overall home provisions that will affect residential windows. There's a small credit towards home energy audits to encourage that to be done. There's an extension and an increase in the tax credit for Energy Star homes and Energy Star multifamily buildings. You can see $2,500 per home, $500 per multifamily unit. That's been extended out to 2032. And I'll note there that each of those numbers can be doubled if prevailing wage requirements are met. And we're going to see that as a recurring theme. There's across a number of these provisions, there's a certain amount of money available in any case, and it's increased if certain prevailing wage requirements, and we'll talk about some other stuff coming up, are met. And that's really governed by the Department of Labor. They already do this, but the Secretary of Labor will they issue kind of prevailing wage requirement rules each year and based on region. There's also $4 billion, a little over $4 billion, going into a new program called a Homes Rebate Program. I'm sure Homes must be some acronym, but I can't remember what it is right now. But it's really aimed at more retrofit. So this is the first Energy Star homes is aimed at new buildings, new homes. This one is rebates up to $2,000 to $4,000 for home and apartment energy efficiency retrofits, depending on the energy savings. Kind of a holistic, do whatever you want. If you reduce your energy savings by a certain amount, then you can achieve this credit. And then the amount's doubled in this case if you happen to do it in a low or moderate income housing, which is defined in the law. And DOE will be issuing guidance on exactly and really developing this program over the next 2 years in terms of what is involved or included. And then there's an equal amount, another $4.3 billion aimed specifically at high efficiency electric homes. So again, this is kind of this overall goal of pushing electrification of our economy. This is to address climate change. If you electrify your loads, That on its own doesn't really do anything if your electric power plant is all coal powered, but then the idea is then you put more green power, more green electricity onto the grid as well. So together it moves us away from fossil fuels and more towards overall addressing climate change. So there's a lot of money here specifically focused on high efficiency electric homes. And that's really going to be focusing on electric HVAC, so heat pumps and appliances. But also there's some insulation and air sealing measures because you want to do both together. And it's an open question. I don't know. Can windows be included under insulation? Because it does provide the U factor provides an insulating benefit. I don't know. That's really an unknown that will have to be sorted out with DOE as they implement this program. And then finally, there's a chunk of money out there for home energy efficiency contractor training. So that'll tie into some of the programs out there that deal with window installation, but just overall in general, contractor training.
So what do you think the impact of this on our window manufacturers?
Yeah, so everything on this screen is really at the home level, the overall home level. For windows specifically, and doors and skylights, it's really, it doesn't list those specifically per se, but it's going to push use of Energy Star and support the use of Energy Star windows, doors, and skylights, because that'll certainly help achieve the requirements for each one of these programs. Although I'll note it's a little ironic that you don't have to use an Energy Star window in an Energy Star home, because it's just about the overall number. That's something that a few of us have griped about for years, but in general, they will tend to be Energy Star. So this will support the new upcoming Energy Star version 7 as that rolls out.
Okay.
Next, moving on to commercial buildings. So on the commercial side, I think most people are familiar with the 179D deduction, which is the energy efficient commercial buildings deduction, although the word deduction is kind of taken a new flavor this time. But interestingly, this kind of slid under the radar, but they made the 179D deduction permanent in December of 2020. It was embedded as part of a omnibus bill packaged in there with the coronavirus relief bill. So it's already there. It's made permanent. There's no end date on it unless Congress changes their mind. Of course, they can always do that in the future. But it set a baseline that was very difficult, 50% ASHRAE 90.1 2019 for the building. And that's challenging, and many fear that would make it unusable. So not us, but other people, other industries, I should say, were up there lobbying, including kind of on the advocate side, to back off that a little bit, because what good is a program if nobody uses it? So the Inflation Reduction Act adjusts this to a new sliding scale that starts at 25%. Beyond 90.1 2019, with an increasing deduction up to 50%. So it makes it a little more achievable while still maintaining an incentive to do even better. And that amount is modified from the current $1.88 per square foot of floor area, that's floor area, not window area, to this sliding scale. It's 50 cents to $1 as the baseline, where 50% or 50 cents is with the 25% energy efficiency level, and it goes up linearly to $1 per square foot if you hit 50% beyond 90.1. And then interestingly, that's the base level. So then here's another case where they increase that by 5 times in this kind to $2.50 to $5 per square foot, which is very significant. And talking about 100,000 square foot office building, $500,000 are potentially on the table there. So that's significant if prevailing wage and registered apprenticeship requirements are met. So I already mentioned the prevailing wage that's governed by Department of Labor. It also has requirements now trying to foster development of new people, new workforce, that if a certain number of people on the site have to be in a registered apprenticeship program. And there's like certain ratios in there about journeyman versus apprentice. For small businesses, if you have a a crew of 4. One of them has to be an apprentice in a registered program. So this will encourage continued education, and in case of NGA, it'll encourage some of the programs for glazing contractor programs, certified glazing contractors. And so that's interesting change that'll be coming up. And that, again, those rules are going to be governed by Department of Labor. So there'll be, it awaits, I guess, information coming from the Secretary of Labor to issue what qualifies, what guidelines are going to be in there. And then the last one I want to mention is that previously tax exempt entities cannot take advantage of the 179D because it's a tax deduction, not a tax credit. This changes that. It directs rules to be developed. So again, now DOE will have to take some time and establish some rules. But once those are set, it would allow the deduction to be allocated to the designer of the property instead of the owner. So if you're working on a school project that's a nonprofit or a private nonprofit organization, they're nonprofits, so they can't really take a deduction, but it can give that money to the designer of the property, and then presumably they'll give that either as a pass that along to the building owner or a discount or whatever they come to agreement on. But the point is, it allows now this whole new category of tax exempt entities and local, including both private nonprofit as well as local government, to participate in this.
So Tom, how did these changes to 179D, excuse me, apply to existing buildings? You've previously talked about how existing buildings have new standards and performance standards.
Right, great question. So a lot of people think of 179D as for new buildings. Not the case. So, well, it is, but it's also for existing buildings. And yeah, I've spoken in the past about these new building performance standards that are coming up. And it started off in New York City, but it's bouncing across the country, many different states that are going to encourage retrofits of existing buildings, commercial buildings. And you can take advantage of this tax credit too. So it's for buildings that are over 5 years old. And it allows you to take it multiple times. Before, you could only take advantage of it once. So if you did HVAC 1 year and you wanted to do the envelope the next year, well, you couldn't take advantage of it next year. Now you can take advantage of it more than once. There's certain rules around that. But it basically, you have to lower the energy efficiency, the energy use index or EU intensity, the EUI of the building by 25%. So if you, it's not tied directly to a code, it's tied to reducing the energy use of that building. That's nice because, you take, whether you have a good building or a bad building, if you reduce the energy use of it, you can potentially get a credit for it. It also doesn't necessarily require a building model, because it's just, there's going to be rules put in place by DOE on how you determine that. There's ways out in the industry already, but they'll set formal rules about how you determine the energy use from 1 year to the next and whether you met that reduction. The amount, you can either take a dollar amount, which is not exactly clear to me. They talk about the excess amount, which I'm not sure what that means exactly, if it's tied to these amounts or not. Or it also allows you to choose the option to take the adjusted basis from the improvement in the first year. So basically accelerated depreciation rather than depreciating it over 39 years, which is the traditional metric. You can depreciate it in 1 year. So that kind of helps with cash flow. So there are opportunities there for existing buildings as well as new buildings. So I think this will really support our industry from whether it's glazing replacement, window replacement, commercial secondary windows, daylighting systems, all sorts of issues or ways we can take advantage of this.
For sure.
And kind of speaking of different product options and technologies out there. Electrochromic glazing, you may have seen in some of the trade press out there, but we've had some questions about it. Electrochromic glass, was the term they used, was added as energy property that can fall under and claim a tax credit under section 48A. Just like there's 25C that some of you are familiar with, there's a whole nother section that's a little more broad, applies to commercial spaces as well, called 48A. If construction begins before January 1st of 2025. So there's a credit there, and this is the language showing it there, where it's added in. They inserted it into another section having to do with fiber optic distributed sunlight. I'm not even sure exactly. I've never seen that, but anyways, they put it in there in here as well. So there's a short time frame, but to take action, but a couple years of a pretty significant credit. There's a 6% credit as the base level. And then again, this is one of those cases where you can multiply that by 5 up to 30% credit if you meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship program requirements. Again, those rules are set to be established. And you may also qualify for domestic content credit under section 45, which is a bonus of up to an additional 2% base level, or 10%, if you meet these prevailing apprenticeship program requirements. And again, there's rules that are to be issued on that. In general, though, the law says to target 40% domestic content, and then but there'll be rules on how that's calculated and added up for parts versus the total assembly.
Tom, are these percentages only for the cost of the electrochromic glass, or is it the whole assembly?
Yeah, so this is one area where we'll kind of have to wait and see for IRS to issue some guidance on that question. So I guess the short answer is I don't know. But in talking with a colleague at DOE, and these 48A credits have been applied to the complete installed assembly for other energy property areas. So if the IRS guidance follows suit, it would, in theory, based on the prior way 48A has worked, it would apply to the complete installed assembly, which would be fantastic, because that would be 30% of the window or 30% of the curtain wall. But again, we don't know for sure. That's one case where we're gonna have to wait and see what the IRS says. But it could be, it's like I mentioned, it's a short-term thing. People need to jump on this because construction has to begin before January 1st of 2025. And with the design, timing in there, that's short, but could be quite significant. Real quick, before I forget, just on timing, everything I'm talking about in here is for projects that are kind of like starting after, or where construction is starting or being placed in service after this year. So there are different numbers there is stuff in effect now for stuff that are projects either currently underway or will finish by the end of the year. Those are different. They're different numbers. We'll have to, it's in the law. We can find out more about that later. But really, everything I'm talking about is a lot of stuff starts after December 31st, 2022.
So nothing that's actually in progress right now. So you can't retroactively go after this.
Maybe. That's again where something's not clear, but there are some dates in there for stuff that was started after 2019 and put in place before 2022. Again, don't quote me on that. So there are, and then plus there's also current credits that, the old note, I'm not talking about electrochromic here, but just like the 25C stuff. And you can take the 25C stuff this year based on, if you haven't filed your 2021 taxes yet and you did Windows last year, you can take that credit, but it would be under the old terms.
I see.
So it's possible, but I just want to emphasize that most of the numbers and things I'm presenting really start in after December 31st, 2022. If you're before that, there's either some different numbers or you just fall under the old prior tax benefits. Going beyond the kind of some of these tax credits, there's other stuff in there, just kind of funding mechanisms that may help in certain areas. One is, at NGA, we've talked about EPDs and embodied carbon a lot lately, and there's an industry-wide EPD from NGA on flat glass. There's discussions of other EPDs on processed glass. The Aluminum Extruders Council has industry-wide EPDs on aluminum extrusions. So some are out there, but we all know there's a problem of not a problem, but a burden in terms of developing EPDs going down the product stream, the value, as you add more variation, different product options, it blows up very quickly when you want to expand the number of EPDs. So EPA has been given $250 million to develop a program to help with EPDs, and that includes not just them having tools and things like that, but actually giving money, grants to building construction materials manufacturers to develop and verify EPDs. So that money will be available over the next 9 years, really. And who knows, that may be something we as an industry, either individual companies or as trade associations, may want to tap into. There's also, on the embodied carbon side, a lot of people will talk about GSA as the country's largest real estate owner. And that's true when you look at the number of federal buildings and other properties that are under GSA administration. And so it's always viewed as a the first place is you can start to push new concepts on the federal side first before it goes out into the private sector. And for those of you who were with us in our advocacy day in DC, you heard a number of the Congress people say that. They're like, well, that's an interesting idea. I could certainly get behind that at the federal level and then see where it goes before it gets into the private sector. And that's a common thing. So one thing they're doing here is that there is $100 million. That's actually a small amount appropriated to EPA, really just to develop a labeling program together with GSA and the Highway Administration on identifying and labeling substantially lower levels of embodied greenhouse gas emissions as compared to industry averages. We don't know what that means yet. Will really be up to EPA. That's really just kind of like identifying what would qualify and or how to label it. And then their actual real money, $2.15 billion, will go into the Federal Buildings Fund, which is, it's the money that GSA uses for all their projects, both new buildings and alterations. But that $2.15 billion will be earmarked specifically for using these low embodied carbon construction materials and products that were kind of identified in that first step. So it's there's some real money there that are kind of targeted at this on federal projects. Maybe
NGA's advocacy committee can look in to see how we can influence this, especially if with the EPDs and embodied carbon, and if it's tied to global warming potential as well.
Yeah, definitely, because in a number, we've hosted talks on the difference between embodied carbon and operational carbon, and we would hope that EPA would take that into account when they're looking at this as well, because for us to take advantage of this, really they need to look at both together, and that gives a more realistic picture of what's happening in the building. Because our products in particular may take a little energy to make them, but they save a lot more in the long run. So yeah, it's something I think that we need to have a conversation and continue that dialogue with EPA and GSA as it moves forward.
Absolutely.
And then I think this is my last slide, kind couple items touching on manufacturing and industrial incentives. So there's under its different part of the act, there's advanced manufacturing production credits aimed at supporting domestic production of solar modules, 7 cents per watt of capacity, and then also for domestic production of aluminum, and that's under this applicable critical minerals section, where they're not just aluminum, but there's a number of important materials for a number of industries, things going into EV batteries, things going into electronics, things going into infrastructure, like the case of aluminum. In that case, it's 10% of the production cost. And I just really mentioned that here because for our industry, we have many of you may be aware of kind of the supply chain issues on the aluminum side. And so the hope is that this will help free that up a little bit, along with other things that are happening. And then lastly, on the glass side, there's a $5.8 billion appropriated to DOE that will go out through a FOA, which a funding opportunity grant, where you put in your application and apply over the next few years. So it's pretty coming up quick, but it's really aimed at industrial facilities that are considered energy intensive to retrofit or upgrade their factories to reduce greenhouse gases. And they specifically mention glass production. You can look in the list down below, but it's kind of number of big things like steel and cement and things like that. But for our industry, glass is listed right there, so is aluminum. And so those will, for the primary manufacturers, there's a opportunity there for funding to help further reduce, I guess, the greenhouse gas footprint of our materials.
That's good. Overall, really good for the industry where it comes to opportunities to look into. Of course, still a lot of, things that needs to be clarified. But yes.
Yeah, and exactly. And that's what we want to emphasize. Again, we're not tax attorneys. We're not here commenting on any specific projects or programs. We're just we want to give you a flavor of what's coming and what what to look for over the coming year as guidance and rules are developed. It goes from Congress to the administration now to implement this law. So Department of Labor, the Department of Energy, EPA, GSA will all, and then IRS, of course, on the tax side, will all be really issuing a lot of information coming up in the coming months and year. But so a lot to be figured out, but in my view, a lot of positive opportunities.
Awesome. Well, we do have a couple questions in the chat. It says, who gets the benefit, the tax benefits, the owner, GC, or glazer? And I'm not sure.
I would guess they're talking about the 179D energy efficient commercial buildings. In that case, it goes, or for if it's the 48C, which is the energy property, which is includes solar and electrochromic. Either one, if it's a new, well, it goes to the building owner. Goes to the building owner with the one exception that I mentioned, which was for tax exempt people, where they're getting no benefit from it. If they're tax exempt, they don't get a benefit from the deduction. In that case, it goes to the designer of the property. And then it doesn't say anything, but the assumption is that then at least some of those that will be passed on to the building owner, or it'll be some agreement between the building owner and the designer.
Okay. A question on electrochromic glass. It says, are there prescriptive requirements for electrochromic glass as in SHGC values?
No, it's now DOE and IRS could come up with some. but at least what's written in there is just a definition of this qualified energy property, including electrochromic glass, which yeah, I can't remember the exact wording. It was on one of the earlier slides. Has to do with changing its properties. I think they even. I'll look real fast. Why not? Change its light transmittance properties in order to heat or cool a structure. So, but no prescriptive criteria, at least not yet, unless it,
okay.
Yeah.
Another question on the electrochromic, it says, do you think the electrochromic incentives will apply to software and hardware required to run the system?
I have no idea.
It doesn't say.
Again, that'll depend on IRS guidance on this whole item. If it's similar to the earlier comment I made, we don't know, like on the percentage, we don't know what the IRS will say. We have to wait and see what the guidance is. If they treat it like they have other energy property, it would apply to the installed assembly. And so I don't know, but you can make a good argument that since it's required for the function to run, you could make that argument. But again, we have to wait and see what the IRS says. Is that part of the assembly or not?
And so on of course, this dynamic glazing section as well, for clarification, is this for residential single family applications as well, or just commercial? I don't recall which section this was. Electrochromic.
Oh, everyone's interested in electrochromic. So so this, yeah, it can. I don't want to say too much because I don't know for sure. But one question, I was talking with Mark LaFrance, who a lot of you know at DOE, and both of us have the same question. Neither one of us have an answer, but can you stack these credits? If you put electrochromic in a triple pane Energy Star most efficient window, can you take 48A and 25C? I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, we'll find out in the coming months, I guess.
Here's another one. It says, Tommy raised an interesting point regarding the 179D deduction. Going back to 25C credits for windows, how much value is there when a small percentage of windows sold meet the ME requirements?
Well, 179 is tied to the energy performance of the whole building. So just doing a couple windows won't get you there. Now, if they do it as part of a deep retrofit affecting mechanical, lighting, and a couple windows, yeah, they might be able to get there. But either way, the money, if they do qualify, will go to the building owner. On 25C, if you do one window that meets Energy Star most efficient, you can take 30% up to $600 for one window.
Another question, any potential?
I should say the homeowner gets to take that, not not the window manufacturer.
Yes. Another question, are there any potential for electrifying glass production?
That could be a grant proposal during the, that last bit I was talking about. So DOE is a little slow with all this stuff. They put out a request for information, then they do a FOA, which is a funding opportunity announcement, then they have a grant review. But it's, if you have a way to reduce greenhouse gas emission of a industrial facility listed right here, then it could be part of a grant proposal. And it's up to DOE to prioritize and fund those. Although the law does say it's priority will be given to those that reduce greenhouse gases the most. But so if electrification could be part of that, it could be a proposal.
Okay. Could you review what impacts there might be to BIPV or PV projects?
Yeah, so I didn't spend a whole lot of time going into the solar, but there's a lot in there. Obviously part of the overall electrification and climate change goals of the administration and the law is about doing stuff on the building side, but also then on the renewable energy side, including solar. So the 25, or it's not 25C, I think it's 25D, the residential credit rebate for solar going on your home. That's typically solar panels on the roof. That was extended out to 2032. It's a little shorter time under 48C. It has that same end date of only, or construction starts on by January 1st, 2025. And then the percentages are a little different. Heat pumps got to pass, by the way. They got extended out to 2035. DOE loves heat pumps, which doesn't help us, but the solar, so on the commercial PV, BIPV, it will have at least some credits there. There are increased credits for solar systems going in serving low income and underrepresented communities. That's more like not on your home, but kind of a community solar type project. There's some incentives there. On the BIPV side, you can also take some credit for it under the 179D. You can use that to help get beyond ASHRAE 90.1 2019. They limit how much they want to allow that to be efficiency, not just throwing on solar panels. So the ASHRAE, it's not the law, but ASHRAE 90.1 sets a limit on how much you can take credit for, but 5% of that number could come from solar, BIPV and solar. So there's a number of credits out there, right? That could be a whole nother talk on the solar stuff alone. But
and question on do you believe that the benefits for glass manufacturing can also be applied to the glass fabricators?
That's interesting. The question for DOE, production processes or other energy intensive industrial processes as determined by the secretary. So you know what? That's another good opportunity for advocacy, where we would go in and say, hey, when you do this, make sure it's would also cover, or at least consider covering fabrication. Thinking about like tempering, things like that are on the more energy intensive side. But the other thing is this, whatever they decide will go out for a DOE grant process. So that means there'll be a request for information, an RFI, and that'd be another place where comments could be filed that says, we want the grant process to also apply to these facilities. And so they'll consider that, but as you can see there, they're really trying to target really upstream stuff, but that's something that's a good advocacy discussion with them.
No, for sure. I think our advocacy committee has its marching orders here, huh? One question on EPDs: are there guidelines available on how to access funds for EPDs?
No, again, it's too early. So this money has been appropriated to EPA, so it's there now. They have to figure out what to do with it, and you can see I didn't copy word for word, but it's basically to develop a program and provide grants to construction building manufacturers to develop and verify EPDs. It's as vague as that. So it will take EPA some time to process that, figure out what they want to do, how they want to issue the funding, how they'll have a grant application process. So even though it says money available 2022 to 2023, typically it'll take them at least a year to get through that. So it's going to be a little longer. So it may not satisfy. I know we have some 5-year time limits coming up on certain industry-wide EPDs, as well as companies that may have their 5-year time limit coming up. It probably won't help with that. It'd be more like, hey, do we want to tackle a new area and do EPDs on other industry-wide type assemblies? But
no, that makes sense. Well, we'll definitely engage our advocacy committee and ask the question at least. Another question here: what do we estimate as the overall impact on project forecasts and industry expansion and possible labor demand? Ooh, that's a loaded one. I don't know.
I have no, that's way beyond my area of expertise, but so I don't know, except for I will say it's interesting how throughout the bill, there are a number of credits, residential and commercial, that are and solar and renewable and other EV manufacturing, anything, almost everything in there is tied to credit or grant or a certain amount as a base level, and then some multiple, either 2 times or 5 times if you meet prevailing wage requirements, but also a apprenticeship program rules. So that's, they are trying on the latter part, they are trying to foster development of new young workforce under registered certificate or registered apprenticeship programs. So what's that mean? I don't know. It's a good question. We'll have to see.
Yeah.
I fall under the Department of Labor.
Well, like you said, there's still a lot to figure out, but definitely some good opportunities for the glass and glazing industry. I think that's the last of our questions. I would say thank you all very much for joining us today on this webinar. More to come. If you are not engaged in the NGA Advocacy Committee, please let us know. Send me an email and let me know that you're interested in being a part of this, so that way we can continue our conversations with EPA, with GSA, and with DOE as well on this. So some of the activities that are coming up, one that's not on here, but I do believe that Sarah can put it in the chat, is that next week we have our Thirsty Thursday webinar, which each month we have a webinar with different variants topic. And next week it's glazing industry response for the need for heightened school security. So that will be something in which next Thursday we will have. It talks about the new standard that actually was just not published yesterday on school security. Our next meeting, we will be meeting in Miramar Beach in January, and then the Building Envelope Contractors Conference is in March. And then, of course, we're planning our next Glass and Glazing Advocacy Days. We did have one this past April in which we were able to engage with members of Congress as well as EPA and DOE on these topics. And then, of course, we're planning our summer meeting in Tacoma, Washington for 2023. Thank you again and thanks Tom for kind of going through all of this. It's a lot of information to digest. Stay tuned for NGA for additional information. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.